And I've gotten to the surface after an 80 or 90 meter dive and not even really been out of breath. And I've seen other divers come to the surface at 90 meters and relax and just take their nose clip off and just say, hey, I'm okay. That's it.
The big question is this: how do we take a seemingly ordinary world and make it beyond extraordinary? In yoga, there is so much more than meets the eye, and it's not just the things we do on our yoga mats that make the biggest difference. That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name is Austin Bitsis, and welcome to Life as a Secret Yogi. We have Robert King on the show today. He lived and worked in law in Northern California around the Silicon Valley area, and now currently resides in Florida training and teaching freediving. He spent a lot of his time surfing and trail running and used yoga to support it. But what really makes Robert interesting and a secret yogi himself is that he's been able to introduce it into freediving training, competing, and teaching it to aspiring freedivers. He's a 5-time world champion in freediving, 21 U.S. records he holds, and he has 5 years on board the international governing body of the freediving AIDA, International Freediving Association. He has multiple podium finishes at major events. He's the first American to dive 300 feet deep and the only American freediver to dive the Red Sea Arch, which is 200 feet down, 100 feet through, and 100 feet up. We'll cover this and more. So Rob, welcome to Life as a Secret Yogi yoga podcast as we hear your life as a secret yogi. Pleasure to have you on the show today.
No, it's good to be here. And Austin, before we start, I'd like to say one thing to our listeners. Unless you're under the supervision of a qualified instructor, don't hold your breath in water. There are some safety issues there. So that's the one caveat to get out of the way at the start. So where would you like to begin after that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that's a great point. And let me just share a little bit about the audience, and then we'll just dive right into kind of unpacking your story into freediving and kind of how you got started into integrating yoga into the practice. So before we dive in, my audience are those that want to take the practice of yoga, meditation, breath work, energy work, animal-assisted therapy, among other related tools into the real world. It's a lot of people who are looking to perform at a higher level in other disciplines such as running, golf, surfing, weightlifting, freediving, basketball, art, music, entrepreneurship, and so on. Or simply those who just want to make life beautiful. The audience does not necessarily have the desire to become the stereotypical yogi or yoga teacher. Nevertheless, the audience would like to utilize the tools of yoga, meditation, these other related practices to make life beautiful. And in short, the message of the secret yogi is that we all have this heroic self, our inner source that we cultivate through the tools of yoga, meditation, breath work, animal-assisted therapy, and these other related practices to take a seemingly ordinary world and make it extraordinary. It's that we all have this superhero that lives within, and yoga, meditation, and these similar practices help us tap into our quote, superpowers, being mindfulness, awareness, love, focus, and creating happiness from within, to just list a few, but ultimately just feel good in a body that we love. So we really hope this episode helps you unlock your own superpowers through yoga and these other related practices as we talk about them. And if you like this episode, make sure to share it with at least one person who needs it most. And please leave a written review and rating wherever you're listening to right now. So Rob, thanks so much for hopping on the show today. I'm super interested in hearing more about your story. We talked briefly before. And can you share a little bit more about your story and the things that you teach about freediving? And freediving is a pretty epic sport and to say how we've been talking about it before, but can you tell the audience a little bit about your background?
Yeah, definitely. And I'm excited to talk to you about yoga and freediving because there's a natural connection between the two. It goes back decades. The first really famous and successful freediver was Jacques Mayol back in the 1960s and 70s and 80s. Was a big fan of yoga and practiced yoga, and it's really there's a huge crossover between the yoga world and the freediving world. A lot of freediving instructors are also yoga instructors and the other way around. So it's kind of a natural connection. As to how I got into freediving, I was working as a business lawyer in Northern California, and I decided to take a sabbatical, and ended up doing some. I got my scuba instructor license, and decided to start freediving a little bit. So I took a class or two and really enjoyed it. And by chance, I was living in Northern California, and so what I was doing in my free time was mainly surfing and running up hills and stuff like that, which in hindsight, it turns out is good practice for freediving. It's really good training for it. So I actually was able to do quite well. Got invited to a competition back in 2006, the Team World Championships, and went there. Kind of thinking I, kind of knew what it was about, and was just blown away by what I saw. People were doing things that just didn't seem humanly possible. There was a guy there that held his breath for 9 minutes. People were diving, 100 meters down almost. And it was just stuff that I'd never, it just didn't think was possible. And I saw then that, a lot of people were doing yoga, and they were using a lot of techniques from yoga and, like visualization and mindfulness that I had seen from yoga, and I'd started sort of using for running and surfing a bit, but saw people using it in a very focused way and saw what it could do, and was just really excited by it all.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I didn't realize that correlation between yoga and freediving, in the sense that there's so many different instructors that kind of like cross practice the two. I didn't realize it was that popular between the two, but I think the correlation between the tools that you use for, such as we mentioned, like surfing, running, but freediving definitely, and yoga are so important. And that's kind of where we're taking this episode. And I mean, a lot of people might be asking, some of those records you hold are pretty incredible. And some of the stories that you shared with me and that we could share with the audience are pretty epic, and I would say high risk. And people might be asking, like, what is it that kind of drew you in? Was it the rush? Was it some internal purpose? Was it to really just push your body to new limits?
That's a really good question. It was a couple things. Part of it was just the people who did it were so interesting, and the camaraderie of it all was just, I just found that really interesting. The first couple of years, just going to the events and meeting people was a huge part of it. And part of it also was the ocean. I think you're also a surfer. I had gotten into surfing in Northern California, and I think the first time I did it, it was just like the curtain had been pulled back, and I saw something that I didn't think it existed, didn't know it was possible really. And the fact that you could just, with a little bit of effort, paddle onto a wave and be moving as fast as a car or something was incredible. So the ocean's always had been a huge magnet for me. And once you kind of get that addiction to it, you find things with the ocean just really mesmerizing. So freediving, just going down, and it's not an adrenaline rush sport. Red Bull used to sponsor freedivers until they figured that out. But it's definitely, it uses a lot of the mental techniques other sports do, the calming, the visualizing, the breathing and all that. And I found just being in the ocean and being able to move like in 3 dimensions, kind of like birds do in the air, we can do that in water. And just really love that. So those were, I think, the people and just being kind of free in the water were the 2 big ones.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think once you get hooked in the water, I grew up by the ocean, and as you mentioned, I'm a big time surfer. A lot of the audience knows that I was a competitive runner for many years, but I don't think I've shared on the show that I was a competitive lifeguard as well, and we used to do all types of training in ocean rescues and competitive lifeguard tournaments. So yeah, once you get hooked, you're hooked, and but it's incredible that you took it to this level, and just top level, as we're going to talk more about it across this whole episode. But the audience kind of must be wondering, how can a typical human swim down to 200, 300 feet, and also, well, just on one single breath, but also like, how does it relate to yoga? We mentioned just briefly, but kind of like top level.
Yeah, it's really kind of like the theme of your podcast, which is, everyone has inner superpowers, and human beings do have extraordinary psychological and physiological abilities that you can really unlock with a bit of guidance and training. And this is, you see Usain Bolt run faster than anyone else can run, and you see people surf better than people play tennis better. And these are things that, are possible for actual, just typical human beings who happen to be maybe genetically a little bit better at it, but who focus on it and train at it. And by doing that, unlock abilities they didn't know they had. And one of the reasons that your show kind of ties into freediving is freediving relies on what's called the mammalian dive reflex, which is a kind of inner set of physiological abilities that all mammals have and birds have it too. And it's something you can unlock and work with through a little bit of training, and go from being able to hold your breath from 20 seconds, which is what a normal person can do maybe just sitting in a room, to holding your breath for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, just through knowing how to breathe and relax. So it's pretty similar to the theme of your show, which is these things are inside of all of us. If you know how to kind of unlock them a little bit, you've got some abilities you probably don't know you have.
Yeah, no, awesome. And I love to start off diving into, I mean, pun intended, but into the physiological side of freediving, because like we just mentioned, in terms of the practice, it almost seems like inhuman to be able to dive to those depths. And you just mentioned the mammalian dive reflex, and you started telling me about it last time we spoke, but can we break that down a little bit more?
Absolutely. And you mentioned earlier, you're diving down hundreds of feet. And if you were to tell somebody, you can dive down 100 feet or 200 feet or 300 feet or now 400 feet and make it back to the surface in a single breath, nobody would really think that's possible. But everybody has the ability to do this. And the mammalian dive reflex is how that's done. If you think about seals and dolphins and whales, they live in the ocean. They dive, they do this all day long. They dive hundreds of feet down. Whales and seals can dive thousands of feet down, standard for up to an hour. And the physiological processes are really pretty straightforward. They've actually been pretty well documented now. The main one that most of the listeners might have heard about, which you might actually find in a yoga class, is bradycardia, or a slowing heart rate. By breathing properly, and especially by holding your breath, your heart rate slows significantly. When your heart rate slows, your oxygen consumption slows significantly, which is really useful if you're underwater and holding your breath. The second one is peripheral vasoconstriction. And that basically means that when you start diving, especially if you're trained, your blood stops flowing to your arms and legs. It basically just circulates between your brain, your heart, and your lungs, and keeps the oxygen-rich blood going to your brain to keep you conscious. And that's pretty cool, because that means your arms and legs can work anaerobically. If you were a runner, you felt, you know what it's like to work anaerobically at the end of a race, you're going full out, that lactic acid filling leg. That's pretty much what you're doing. You're free diving. Your body stops sending blood to your arms and legs and saves it all to keep you conscious, which is kind of cool. The third one is the spleen effect. Your spleen is basically, it does other things, but it's also a reservoir of red blood cells. And when you hold your breath, it releases those oxygen-rich red blood cells into your blood. So it's sort of like having, an extra tank of gas in your car that dumps more gas in when you need it. And that one was documented in humans for the first time in 2006 at the World Championships. There was a medical researcher there who used, might botch the exact science of this, but the general principles I get right. She has, I think, echocardiograms on the spleen. And when trained freedivers held their breath, you could see the spleen contract and release the red blood cells into the bloodstream, which allows you to hold your breath longer. And the final one is a little more technical. It's called the Bohr effect. It just means as you hold your breath more, your blood changes acidity, and that allows the oxygen to leave the red blood cells and go to your brain tissue where you need it. So that's all pretty cool stuff that all happens without you having to do anything.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. The science behind it and being able to do it. I remember just trying to dive down to, when I was ocean lifeguard, we used to play this game called Treasure Hunt. And again, not telling anybody to try this out at home, but we used to dive, swim out as far as we could. And you take turns going, where it'd be, I would dive down 25, 30 feet, come up with a handful of sand, and then your friend would swim out 10 more feet, dive down, and then whoever basically, as you swam out further and further and dive deeper and deeper and deeper, couldn't come up with sand. But we'd only be able to go maybe, like 30, 35 feet or so, assuming asking the boats around there. But it's incredible, like the ability to dive down to the depths that you've dived down to, which is like 300 feet. So in what other examples of this practice or this mammalian dive reflex can be used outside of freediving? Like, how else can we lower our heart rate? And then what are the benefits outside of maybe somebody who doesn't do freediving?
Very good question. Some of these techniques we use, there are physiological adaptations. There are also psychological adaptations. And breathing is really the key to all of this. You really, by breathing and how you breathe, and then by not breathing, that's how you kind of access things. And I think I mentioned before, you've probably heard this from other yogis, that breathing is kind of the bridge between the conscious and the unconscious. It's the one function you can control consciously, like opening and closing your hand. But you can also, if you don't think about it, it works on its own, just like your heartbeat. So it's kind of one that does both. And by, depending on how you breathe, you can do things like relax yourself, lower your heart rate. So the breathing techniques that we use, and I'll show that in the guided practice that we have for the end of the session, by breathing in a certain way, which is inhaling quickly and exhaling slowly, that in itself will lower your heart rate. In the water, there's a whole bunch of other things going on. The cold water in your face also lowers your heart rate separately. As you go down in the water column, the pressure actually independently lowers your heart rate. So all those things combine when you're diving. But just by breathing alone, you can do this at the end of the yoga class. They'll kind of walk you through the guided breathing, and you'll find it very calming, which is useful in work situations, home situations, all kinds of things, traffic, all kinds of things in day-to-day life. So it's obviously nobody's diving 300 feet for their work or anything like that, but most people find themselves in stressful situations where being able to relax a little bit is really useful.
Awesome. Yeah, definitely. And in terms of the overall feeling that you must feel when you're diving down, you kind of related it to running and kind of that lactic acid build up. Is that kind of the general feeling as somebody's kind of wondering, like, what does it feel like to dive down that deep? And also, is it easier to dive and lower your heart rate in colder water, as the cold kind of helps you lower your heart rate compared to warmer water?
Those are all very good questions. What does it feel like? There's a huge range of what it can feel like. And I'll get back to that one in a minute, but let me answer the question about does cold water make a difference? In general, yes. Cold water can help decrease your heart rate. So if you were to walk out on the beach, and I've done this in Florida where the water is 75 degrees, it's not really cold, having a heart rate monitor on because I'm going for an open water swim, and I'll just put my face in the water, and in 20 or 30 seconds, my heart rate will drop 10 beats per minute. If it was 70 something, just walking around the water, it will drop down into the 60s just by putting the face in the water. And the colder the water, it will exaggerate that. Now, that's a bit of a two-edged sword for freediving, because if the water is really cold and you're not used to it, it makes the equalization harder because you tense up. So unless you're used to really cold water, you're generally going to be more comfortable in a place like the Caribbean where the water is the same temperature the whole way down. I had a roommate, a training partner, who's now a doctor in Stockholm, and he used to train in lakes in northern Sweden where the water was probably in the 50s at the surface and probably the mid-30s down at depth. And when he would come to the Bahamas for a competition, his first 2 weeks there, he was just having a hard time with it because he said it's too warm, there's no change. And after a couple of weeks, he was, 10 days, he was fine, but he needed to get used to the heat. So all other things equal, the cold will help you lower your heart rate, but you have to be used to it for the equalization. And you kind of asked what it feels like when you're diving, and a lot of that depends on your state of mind. It's kind of, which can be true when you're running a race too, or a lot of other things. A dive that goes really well can feel you don't, if you're relaxed and you compress, you can go down 80 or 90 meters. You don't even feel the pressure. Your ears equalize. And I've gotten to the surface after an 80 or 90 meter dive and not even really been out of breath. And I've seen other divers come to the surface at 90 meters and relaxed and just take their nose clip off and just say, hey, I'm okay. That's it. On a really good dive, it feels great. If you're nervous, you feel the pressure because you're tensed up. You notice all the things that aren't working well, and it feels totally differently. So it can feel anything from completely peaceful, just sinking into the depths, and then coming back up to, oh, wow, I really wish I were someplace else right now.
Yeah. Wow. You're incredible. 90 meter dive and just coming up. Oh yeah, I'm great.
The first time I saw that, it blew me away.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And the audience may realize this or not, but freediving is just as much an extreme psychological endeavor as it is a physical endeavor. Can you break down the psychological side of freediving?
Absolutely. It's a huge mental sport, and you have to be physically trained. If you're swimming up from 80 or 90 meters, your legs have to kick for a minute to a minute and a half, basically without oxygen. So it's sort of like running uphill, basically without getting a lot of oxygen in your legs. You'll really feel that. You have to train it. But the mental part of it is even more important. If you think about it, basically, if you're sitting in the water and you're holding onto a line, and the line goes down deeper than you've ever been before, or deeper than anyone from your country's ever been before, and you think, okay, I'm going to hold my breath, swim down there, grab the tag, and swim back up. There's no way in the world you're going to do that. You're probably not going to start. If you do start, you're not going to make it down or get back up. What you need to do is use mental techniques, which are part used for yoga. You do a lot of visualization beforehand. What the visualization does is it kind of mentally rehearses everything. So all your actions are subconscious. You don't need to think about anything. And when you're holding onto the line there, what you're doing is you're breathing in the same way we'll be breathing in the guided practice. And what it does is it lets you basically zone out, where you get into a meditative state where you don't actually notice anything. All you're doing is breathing. You're doing the fast inhale, the slow exhale. Everything else is just pretty much gone. You might be listening for your coach to say 2 minutes, 1 minute, but other than that, it could, someone could fall from an airplane into the water, you probably wouldn't even notice it. And so by not focusing on any of the details other than what you're doing in that second, you can just go through what you know, what you've memorized, which is how to do each motion, without thinking about the thing as a whole, which is too overwhelming to possibly manage mentally. And that's kind of one of the mental keys to it, is just being able to get out of your normal self into a meditative state where you just relax. And you do that just through breathing. And that allows you to then go through what you've mentally rehearsed in the visualizations and the dives. So where you're just, okay, I'm letting go of the rope, I'm equalizing, I'm thinning down, I'm filling my mouth with air. And one of the cool things about freediving is once you get to neutral buoyancy or negative buoyancy at about 30 meters or so, you just start free falling because all the air in your lungs compresses. And you actually don't have to swim the second part of it. So you swim down to about 30 to 35 meters, and then you just relax, put your arms by your side, and you free fall down to the bottom, which is pretty cool. And you can relax that whole way. And most people doing that, the people that are really successful at that, a lot of them are yoga instructors or people that can completely relax their mind as they free fall.
Oh, yeah. And in terms of there's a few stories that you shared with myself about visualization. One in particular was the 2007 Freediving World Championships, when you had an ear infection and kind of utilizing visualization. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That was one of my not better moments for travel. I managed to get to the 2007 World Championships with an earache 8 days before the event started, and went to the local hyperbaric doctor, who was also the ENT, and he said, okay, great, you've got ear infection, gave me some antibiotics and said, you're out of the water for 7 days, come see me next week, the day before the comp. And so I was sitting there, having gone flown all the way to Egypt for this event I had trained for months, thinking, okay, I can't train on site, which is usually considered pretty critical, and what am I going to do? And I was pretty much at wit's end there. But there was another diver there who was a diver from Canada, and I knew he'd been out of the water for over a month already. He had damaged his inner ear and wasn't able to equalize at all. So he couldn't even leave the surface. He couldn't put his head more than about 6 inches below the water without it being sore. So he was out of the water completely. And I said, well, I'm out for a week. What am I going to do? And he said, don't worry about it. He said, just relax. He said, visualize the dives you want to do. You got 2 days of competition you got to do. You got 2 dives, visualize each of those a couple times a day. And he said, also just do some dry breath holds on the sofa to keep that reflex going, and do yoga. He was a big fan of yoga also. And I was desperate. I didn't know what to do. And I said, okay, I'll give it a try, because I had no other ideas at the time. And I had to admit, I was from Northern California, and I'd been hearing about people charging crystals and aligning chakras and all this kind of stuff that I wasn't quite on board with. And I thought, well, this sounded like another one, but I didn't have any better options. So 3 times a day, I would visualize the dives I want to do. I was doing 1 no fins and 1 with fins. And the day before the comp, went back to the doctor. He said, okay, you're clear. You can go dive the next day. And so I went and dove, and to my surprise, actually did the dive I visualized, and went down to the bottom, got the tag, came up, and set a new US record in no fins, did a PB in the with fins. And it was all from the visualization. And that's when I realized it wasn't hocus pocus. It was really a thing. And since then, I've learned that runners and swimmers and everybody else use it also. And now it's actually part of all the training materials in the level 2 classes. All the agencies now teach visualization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and didn't that other guy too who had an ear infection, didn't he place really well as well?
He did. He actually, I didn't find this out till afterwards. He went in the water the day before the comp as well. And he was going every day and trying. And the day before the comp, he was able to get his head underwater. So he pulled himself down the line to about 10 meters, found out he could do it. He was like, okay, this sounds great. And so he announced a depth which was outrageously deep. It was one of the deepest dives a no-fins ever done in the world at the time. And he went and did it. He hadn't been in the water for, other than floating around the surface, for 6 weeks. And he did a 75-meter no-fins dive, took second place at the World Championships with nothing but visualization and dry breath holds. And so that gives you a sense for, I was doing something that was pretty cool. What he did was amazing. And that was all through visualization. So
yeah,
it really does work.
Yeah, definitely. If that doesn't prove that visualization is powerful, I mean, what does? But yeah, I mean, in terms of my own trainings as a competitive distance runner, I mean, as competitive lifeguard, and just throughout daily life, I mean, for when I was a runner, for any big race, of course, I'd be visualizing that probably all season. I'd be visualizing parts of it throughout workouts to get me through hard workouts. We mentioned surfing and other practices. I mean, it doesn't just have to be sports. It's also like anytime that I had to do any type of public speaking and I might be nervous, or anytime I had to really perform in any way, or just kind of wanted a particular result and there's maybe no way to particularly practice that ahead of time. I mean, your mind's just as powerful as doing it physically. So yeah, I mean, that's awesome. Do you have any other examples that you maybe have used visualization in terms of freediving or even outside of freediving?
Yeah, definitely. Like you said, it works for, it's not just freediving, it works for any sport. It works for work. Doing it for presentations is a really good idea. I've done that too. I think somebody mentioned to me at one point was basically your body doesn't know the difference. If you're visualizing something you're doing, your body doesn't know the difference between the two. It learns it anyways. And another case where I did that was a couple of years later, I was back at the Red Sea for the triple depth competition in Dahab. And there's a blue hole that goes 90 meters down, kind of like a cylinder. And then there's a passageway out that goes from kind of the bottom half out into the open sea. And you can swim down into the blue hole. And if you're interested, you can swim out through the passage and up into the open sea part. And that was it was kind of like a test piece at that point. There were I think there were like 8 or 9 people had done it before, and there was another diver I met at the comp who was an up and coming guy, was very strong, and we just decided, okay, we're going to go do this after the event. And the trick with it was you couldn't, there was no shallower or shorter passage that you could go work up to. This was the one thing to do, and you just had to do it. So instead of trying to find something shallower to do and easier, which there wasn't, we just visualized it and said, okay, I'm going to visualize myself going down, going in there, and then coming back up. It was about 200 feet down, about 100 feet through, and about another 200 feet back up to the surface. And mentally, the tricky part was when you got down and looked at it, it looked like a cathedral door. It was kind of shaped like a cathedral door, and it was a deep indigo blue, and everything else was black. So it looked really cool. But your instinct when you're looking at that was, I'm not going in there. It's just, you don't want to do it. So if you visualize it enough times ahead of time, you can go down there, and the way you do it so you don't hit the coral in the top part of it is you flip over, so you go through upside down. You look at it. If you visualize it enough times, you can say, okay, I'm just going to go. And once you get into it, it's just spectacularly beautiful. But it took that visualization to get in there, because I went down and looked at it once or twice and said, nope, not going to do it. And it took a couple of days of visualizing it. And then I went down, looked at it, and said, okay, now I'm ready for it.
Yeah. And you really only have one chance. I mean, you mentioned something about only being able to make like one serious dive per day or per session. So you don't really have many chances. Is there any particular visualization techniques that you use? Because I know as a runner, it was a little easier, like when you're preparing for a big race and you just focus every day. It's just like every step, you know exactly what you have to do. But something for like a presentation where you might not have the opportunity to present, maybe it's like once a year for a project or something you're presenting for pitching for work. And you haven't really ran through it that much. But what are some techniques that you really use? Is it like utilizing each of the senses? Is it visualizing something that's maybe I know for running, I visualized something maybe like chasing me, or I visualized myself in a competition. Is there anything that particularly works for you to get like this clear picture, to have your mind basically not be able to tell what's basically this visualization and what's reality?
Yeah, and I know a lot of the sports do it differently. And I've talked to people like in mountaineering who are really big on saying, okay, I want to visualize the bad things that can happen so I can memorize what to do when they happen. And for freediving in general, we've kind of avoid that. We try to visualize positive outcomes. And like you said, every sense, what the water temperature is doing. If you're in some place like the Mediterranean, where you have thermoclines, where the water is getting colder, as you're doing your visualization, you're thinking, okay, after like 10 seconds, now I'm hitting it, it's dropping like 5 degrees, and it's dropping another 5 degrees 10 seconds later. So you're visualizing that and visualizing it getting darker. And you're trying to think of each sense, maybe the noise from the surface, if there are any boat noise at the surface, those are going away as you get deeper. So you're trying to visualize as many details as you can in every action that you're going to do. And you mentioned earlier that for freediving, it's kind of extra important because you can't because of decompression issues, you can't do multiple deep dives in a day. You get maximum of one, and then you have to take rest days after every 2 days or even 1 day, depending how deep you're diving. So you're really only diving, 1 or 2 days in a row, and that's it. And so being able to visualize it and put as much detail as you can. And you start with, in freediving competitions, you get a 45-minute warm-up period. Well, you visualize putting on your gear, going out to the platform and going through your warm-up routine. And then you visualize the dive itself in detail, every little bit of it. Remembering to clip your safety lanyard on, remembering to equalize before you leave the surface, all the little details, because when you get into that meditative state that allows you to go and swim down 200 or 300 feet without breathing, you can't be thinking about those individually. They have to be kind of hardwired in. The visualization is what really hardwires it. A bit of practice plus visualization is what hardwires it in.
Yeah. So you kind of recommend taking yourself through like the whole thing before the event, or before you're basically what you're trying to perform at, and then also the results. So kind of taking you through the whole thing, like for example, for the race technique that where I was just visualizing maybe the last half of the race, it might have been a good idea to visualize myself warming up and how I felt warming up and getting my racing shoes on, then like stepping at the line and kind of like taking myself through that whole process.
Yeah, it depends on the event you're doing. If you're running a marathon, you really don't have 2.5 to 3.5 hours to visualize the whole thing several times a day. And so you're going to want to really visualize the key points there. One of the cool things about freediving is your performance, even on like a 90-meter dive, is around 3 minutes or less. So you can go through the whole thing several times. You might visualize the warm-up, which is 45 minutes once, and then you'll visualize the dive a couple times itself. And so when you're visualizing the dive, you want the visualization to be maybe at least the 5 minutes before the dive, where you're breathing up and clipping in, and then the whole dive itself. So you want the visualization to take at least as long as the dive would. So that would be, maybe 10 minutes for a dive. Now, for a marathon, you don't want to do that. You don't want to take 3 hours or whatever your marathon time is. You just focus on the stuff you want to do ahead of time. Make sure your shoes are ready, your gear's ready, you've got your gels and everything, and then how you're going to do the start, and then really focus on the key details there, how you're going to be taking each step. But you don't have to spend the 3 hours there visualizing. For freediving, you can do a 3-minute dive a lot easier than a 3-hour marathon.
Yeah, definitely. And this has also helped you, I know you mentioned, with traveling and jet lag. I mean, yoga in general as like a physical form of loosening up, and the physical asana practices and the poses, but in terms of visualization too, because I mean, once you get off the plane, you can't just go diving, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that was another trick I learned. One of the instructors I had mentioned this to me, and I found it worked not just for freediving, but for work and everything else. I used to travel to Europe quite a bit. And he had mentioned to me, basically, don't get off the plane and try to dive. It just isn't going to work. And part of the reason is that jet lag and depth don't mix well. And that's pretty specific to freediving. But in general, when you're changing time zones, your whole body is off balance. And when you get, if you land in London or in Paris or something like that, you're pretty much way off your normal self. But if you go, check in your hotel, throw your bags in there. And what I started doing once I figured this out was, okay, I've got meetings the next day, and I might have a dinner meeting, but I'm going to go to a beacon classes after or go to a Iyengar class this afternoon, and take that 90 minutes and just focus just on the breathing and just on that. And it's made a huge amount of difference just on how I felt and how I slept, the jet lag sleeping. And it worked on business trips. It worked on diving trips. And for diving, because freediving is such a mental thing, you need to really be totally on it. So you can't be jet lagged. For the first couple of days, I'd get over there and just basically walk by the ocean, swim in the ocean, do yoga by the sea if I could. And then on maybe the third day, then start diving. And that gave your body a chance to kind of sync up, and you're better off, starting 2 days later, going at it well than trying, struggling off balance, trying to do it right away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And then in terms of the psychological benefits that we've found, that you shared were important to freediving, which was like the breathing and the relaxation, the visualization, and the, as you call it, like the deconcentration or being in the moment. Is there anything else you would like to share on those three topics, or is there any other particular topics that are also, these topics are also, as we've been speaking about, they're also important and correlate to other disciplines, such as the examples of running, of public speaking, of sitting in traffic. I mean, just life in general is a constant act of action and reaction and performing. So is there anything else you would like to kind of share on the psychological benefits?
Yeah, the breathing and relaxation one is that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. It really helps so many things. There's nothing it doesn't help. And so you can use that for sports. You can use it for running. You can, before a race, you can use it if you're stressed before doing a presentation at work. It's a great way to relax. And the guided practice that we've got after this kind of walks through how to do that. And that's really the one that you can use. It's the way that you can most quickly change your physiology immediately just by your breathing and your psychology as well. So that's the one I'd really recommend. In the level 1 freediving courses, we teach that, and that's the one thing they can learn and then use minutes later to go from holding their breath from 20 seconds to holding their breath for 2 or 3 minutes, because they get that much more relaxed, and it kind of calms them down. So the breathing relaxation is big. The visualization is big. The deconcentration is really great for freediving. I think there are other sports like mountaineering where that would be really possible. I'm not sure that would be that useful for running, but maybe in big wave surfing, where you just need to maintain that kind of sense of calm even when there's something large coming your way. It depends on the situation, but those are kind of the main three and that we focus on.
Yeah, definitely. And then in terms of your course, I mean, for the audience listening right now, so if this is your first time listening or introduced to the Life is a Secret Yogi show, each episode is paired with an interactive episode. May that be a guided meditation, a guided breathwork, or some sort of other interactive practice to help you, the listener, stay consistent in your practice. The interviews are here to educate and inspire and to open up different perspectives, while the following interactive episodes are here to put that which we learned to use immediately. And Rob, you were kind enough to share an exercise from your course you specifically teach to freedivers, but also corresponds to other disciplines and just useful in general. So after this, listening to this episode, definitely go check out the following episode to practice. And can we break down a little bit more about the course that you teach to freedivers quickly, and also that the course is meant for aspiring or freedivers, but what can we expect to learn in terms of the lessons you teach from yoga?
Well, the freediving courses basically come in 3 levels. There's the introductory course, level 1 course, there's an advanced course, and then there's like a master course for level 3. And we teach different things in each one. In the level 1 courses, we have to cover a lot of the basics. In some ways, it's like a level 1 scuba course. You have to learn the physics and physiology of freediving, which are actually, the physics are the same, but the physiology of freediving is completely different than the physiology of scuba diving. The breathing and relaxation is one of the key skills. Breathing and relaxation and equalization are 2 things that you have to teach every level 1 student. If you can't equalize, they can't leave the surface. And if they can't breathe and relax, they can't stay under for very long. So those are really 2 keys. They have to learn about the equipment. That's true for almost any sport. If you take a course in tennis or scuba diving or anything else, you have to learn what the equipment is. And you have to learn some of the basic skills. skills. So you'll learn some of the basic skills like how to fin somewhat properly. And then importantly, similar to scuba diving and mountaineering, you learn safety and rescue. Those are really important things. And in every level course, you learn the safety and rescue stuff kind of over and over at a higher level to make sure you're safe. What you can use out of that in day-to-day life, again, the breathing relaxation are the big ones. And, but doing any sport, whether you're running or swimming or surfing or anything else, any sport where you're kind of pushing yourself, you'll learn stuff about yourself that you wouldn't learn, watching Netflix, for example. And so anytime you kind of put yourself in an area where you're pushing yourself, trying to see what you can do, you'll learn things about yourself and what you can do and what your limits are and stuff. And you can surprise yourself, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, no, it's so incredible how people are using these tools for so many different practices. And in terms of just, like we say in the show, it's like taking a seemingly ordinary world and making it extraordinary. And freediving is truly extraordinary. And Rob, what does your own current yoga and mindfulness practice look like today, or kind of look like maybe even before this COVID time?
I still do quite a bit of yoga. Needless to say, now I'm doing yoga at home, much more than yoga in the studio. And when I traveled, when I was doing a lot of competitions, which obviously I'm not doing this year, I would just bring my yoga mat, because you basically want to be able to, even if you just want to be able to stretch, you need to be able to do that. But I found that being able to do freediving is mentally and physically very taxing. Like you can do, you run a marathon, you expect to be tired afterwards. You can do a 2.5 minute dive to 80 meters, and you can feel the same way you feel after you run a marathon, which you've depleted all your glycogen reserves. You can feel just tired. So being able to go and do an hour restorative yoga session afterwards in the afternoon, once you've ate and slept a little bit, feels really great. So I do a lot of restorative yoga. I'm doing a lot more running now. Most of our pools are still closed. We can get in the water in beaches now, so we're doing open water swimming. But we're not doing a lot of depth work because the case numbers are high enough and the effects on the lungs are significant enough that a lot of freedivers are being pretty careful of it here. So mostly today, this year, which is the unusual year, a lot of running, a lot of open water swimming. And then I do Bikram yoga just because I got into it a long time ago. And there happened to be Bikram studios near where I lived in San Francisco and in France, where I lived there. And I do restorative yoga, basically a Iyengar type practice, which I find really useful after longer runs or things like that. So those are the two main types of yoga I do, and doing those at home right now, like most people are. And then visualizations again, if I'm doing a harder or longer run or swim, I'm going to visualize it the night before. And one of the other things we do, the breathing practice that we show in the guided practice at the end of this show, I'll do that occasionally just to get back into the mode of relaxing. And I may visualize afterwards, or I may do what we call breathing tables, where we do a series of breath holds, where you breathe for a minute and then just relax and exhale and hold your breath for 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, whatever it is. And you do a series of those. And that's kind of our practice breath hold right now for doing dry. And that's one of my training partners was actually from Vienna, Austria, and he didn't like pools. So he wasn't going to pools, and there was no ocean there, needless to say. So he did all of his training basically cycling and doing on his sofa, doing these dry breath holds, and was able to do world record after world record just with those techniques. So even though it's a coronavirus year and some of the gyms and pools aren't open, there's still a lot you can do for freediving that's very useful.
Yeah, no, awesome. And I think your routine almost is like the perfect example of secret yogi, where you're utilizing these tools and the power of just something as simple as restorative yoga. I know I got started in Bikram yoga as well, as there's a studio by me, and I think it was honestly a great way to learn, just because it kind of takes it pose by pose, and it's not too fast in that sense. But it's a great way to say, you have your 2-minute dive. If someone's listening and they're saying, hey, but I'm a runner, maybe they're running an 800 meter race or a 1500 meter race, and it's just after that you're burnt, or you're doing a training run, and it's just adding in something like that will only help you perform at a higher level, rather than maybe sitting on the couch and not doing some type of active recovery. But yeah, that's awesome. And in terms of what's next for you and where can people stay up to date with everything you're working on, I think ultimately some of the stories you were telling me on the show and off the show, you need to write a book. Like that would be an amazing book. Is that something in the plans?
It's funny you should ask. It may be. I've just finished a book, editing a book for a friend, and it will be coming out next year. It's actually the guy from Vienna who has set more world records than anybody else. He wrote his autobiography, which is a pretty incredible story. If you think the things I've done are wacky, he's done some stuff which is really whole other levels of commitment. And that'll be coming out next year. The book title is currently going to be No Limit. And the author's name is Herbert Nietzsche, who I think you might be familiar with.
Yeah, we actually emailed back and forth. He's the one that introduced me to yourself.
Yeah, so as far as the book projects are surprisingly time-consuming, I've decided to take a little time off, but I have thought about it. And it is kind of a world, freediving is kind of a world that most people don't see, and we're getting more and more interest in it. And I may have that in the queue for some time in the future.
Awesome. And for everyone listening, I'm trying to look for a Post-it note I had right here. There's a few documentaries, which I actually had trouble finding on Amazon, but they're definitely out there if you look for them. So one was, I believe, Ocean Men, The Big Blue, Dolphin Man. Any other type of recommendations for somebody maybe interested in learning more about freediving or even starting? Maybe they're aspiring freediver. They say, hey, this is awesome. I want to try it out.
Yeah, the movie The Big Blue is on iTunes. That's a Hollywood movie, and that's was made in the 80s, and it's a great snapshot of what it was then, but it also covers a bit of the yoga and stuff. Ocean Men and Dolphin were documentaries. I don't think there's anything, there have been a few really bad movies made about freediving recently, which I don't recommend. Kind of low budget, not so great, not so interesting. But if people want to follow it, there's a possibility that that freediving will be included in the 2024 Paris Olympics. They'd obviously do it in the Mediterranean, so that might be someplace to follow it. Or if you want to get into freediving, take a course with a qualified instructor. Agencies like PADI, ADA, Molchanov's, there are others. And find a good instructor and take a course. And if they message you and they can't find somebody, you just message me and I can lead them in the right direction depending on where they live.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I actually might check it out myself. In terms of, I love the ocean. I want to take kind of my breath work and visualization and my yoga practice to the next level. And this is a great way. But for everyone listening, Robert King has a website, robertkingdiving.com. And is there anywhere else where you'd like people to get in touch with you, follow what you're doing?
They can follow me on Facebook, the same name. It's a common name, so just look for the one who does the freediving. And then the website you referred to is my comp site. My teaching site is currently under construction, so you can reach me through the comp site. Though I think my email address is on there. So if you want to reach me for instruction, you can do it through there as well.
Awesome. And before we bring this episode to a close, I want to let everyone listening know that I'm super grateful for your time and for everyone who's left a written review and rating. And I would also like to ask if anyone listening right now would like to be featured on the show at the end of the show, just kind of share your story of how yoga really kind of helped change and how you're living your life as a secret yogi. So if you'd like to be featured, just feel free to contact me via Instagram at secret_yogi. And Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. And I really appreciate your time and sharing your story and life as a secret yogi.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all so much for being here. I am truly grateful for your time, and all of you have taken part in the Secret Yogi Society to make life beautiful through bringing together a community of like-minded individuals to go about life's journey together. I appreciate you all that have left a rating and review in whichever platform you're listening to this episode right now. So if you haven't left a rating or review thus far, if you could please do so. Your reviews help push this show further and in turn directly support all those who have joined the Secret Yogi Society. For more information on the Secret Yogi Society, check out our hub, which is www.secretyogisociety.com. From there, you can find all the links to our Facebook group where we are constantly supporting each other as a community and discussing the latest episodes, our Instagram, where we have short, thoughtful quotes and reflections from recent guests, and finally, our newsletter, which is a list of upcoming events, free life yoga classes, and meditations, and a lot more. So all this will be in the show notes below, and have an amazing day. Namaste.